How to sew the Christmas Shopaway bag, available in 4 beautiful designs: the Robin, the Penguin, the Elf and Gnome the Gnome. Make a handy Shopaway bag that folds away into a little triangle pocket when it's finished. Cutting out. I'm going to show you how to cut out and sew the Christmas Shopaway bag, but using the Gnome the Gnome print. All the bags are made in the same way, even if you've got a different design, and I'll show you some extra little bits when you're adding the features. But if you're using one of the other designs, then just take out your panel, whichever design it is, and you can see that all the pieces are on there and they are labelled with the relevant labels, whether you've got the Robin, the Elf, the Penguin or the Gnome. At the bottom you can see the circular pouches, and there are enough pieces here to make 2 pouches which have a different design on the back for each of the pouches. So cut around all of the pieces from the panel. Once that's done, pin the label to the top of each of them so you remember which piece is which. So you've got the bag front and the bag back. Then you have the pocket front and the pocket back, and the pocket casing front and the pocket casing back. And you'll also have 2 strips for the handles. Here are the pieces for the Gnome's arms, but if you're making the Elf you'll have ears, the Penguin and the Robin you'll have wings. And the pieces for the pouches. So each of the pouches has a tab, and it has 2 lining pieces for the front and 2 lining pieces for the back. And then you have the back outer and the back lining as well, and then the pieces for the other circular pouch are exactly the same, they just got a different print on them. Making the pocket. Use a 1/4 inch seam allowance for making the pocket. First, take the pocket casing front piece. Now you need to fold the short ends under by 1/4 inch to the wrong side. To do this, if you measure and mark 1/2 inch from the short end, then fold the raw edge to meet up with that pin, then you've turned it accurately under by 1/4 inch. Just press that into place with your fingers and then turn it over again by the 1/4 inch to create a double hem and pin that into place. And then you need to repeat that to turn the other short end under by 1/4 inch, then 1/4 inch again. I've done this in advance, just pin it into place. Now sew down both of these ends to hem. Once you've done that, take the casing piece and fold it in half lengthways with wrong sides facing. Make sure the raw edges at the long raw edges match up and the short turned end edges match up. If you press one side at a time, you'll get a more accurate finish. Now take the pocket front. Fold that top long diagonal edge, the straight edge that's at the top of the pocket, in half, as you can see here, and just make a little mark, and that's to find the centre. Now take the pocket casing front that you've just hemmed and folded in half, and fold that in half, matching the hemmed short ends. Make a little crease, and this is just to find the centre. You can measure it if you prefer, but it's easier to fold and crease. Now place the centre that you've just marked of the casing on the centre that you've just marked on the pocket front and pin them together. This is the easiest and most accurate way, really, of making sure that the casing is placed centrally on top of the pocket front. Now pin the casing in place to the pocket front, matching up all the raw edges. So the raw folded over edges of the casing need to meet up with the raw edges of the pocket front. Pin it into place carefully all the way along, making sure that that casing stays folded together that you pressed earlier. And then pin it together at the end. Now you'll notice that the casing isn't as long as the pocket front. It will extend, the pocket front will extend about 1.25 inches beyond the edge of the casing, so don't pull the casing to fit, it's supposed to look like that. Then stitch it into place using your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now to get a neat finish, to start with, press this seam open. So just open it up with your fingers. And then take your iron and press the seam open. The ends of the pocket front that extend beyond the edge of the casing, you need to press these downwards as well. they'll just naturally fall downwards as you're pressing that. So they're going to be pressed over by 1/4 inch, which is the same as the seam allowance. Now just make sure that there are no creases at the front. Now press all the seam allowances downwards towards the bottom of the pocket front. Pressing the seam open just makes this a little bit neater. As you're pressing that, again, make sure that the edges of the pocket front stay pressed downwards too. So that's the pocket front finished. Give it a little press from the right side to make sure it's all nice and neat and the edges of the pocket are still facing downwards. The pocket back is made in exactly the same way, using the pocket back casing, which is hemmed, folded, sewn to the pocket back and all pressed, and your 2 pocket pieces are now finished. Adding the features. The bags have different features, so follow the one for the bag you're making. Making Norman the Gnome. Take the arm front and the arm back. Remove the labels. Then place the 2 pieces right sides facing. You can see they're exactly the same size and shape, so just match up the raw edges all the way around and place some pins in. Make sure you match up the ends of the thumbs and the ends of the mittens, as well as the straight end at the bottom. Now stitch together all the way around the edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but don't stitch across the top straight edge. Once that's done, because it's such a little piece and you want it to turn out neatly, just trim off the little corner points, and you can trim off a little bit of the seam allowance on the tight curves round the thumb, and you can see I've cut out a little V in the bit between the thumb and the mitten. And then you can trim the seam allowance, and if you like, place a few little clips in the curves. Removing that little triangle helps to remove bulk from that area. Once that's done, you need to turn it right sides out. Now the easiest way to do this is if you've got a turning tube, pop the tube inside and then take the stick and push it all the way through. If you haven't got a turning tube, you'll just have to turn it carefully right sides out. Now using the stick, carefully push it so all the seams are laying right on the edge. Use the end of the stick to push out the thumb, but do this very, very gently. Push the fabric onto the stick rather than stick into the fabric. Now if you use the stick or a turning tool and run it along the edge of the seam, this really helps to get the seam to lay right on the edge, and you will just get a neater, flatter finish. But just do this slowly and carefully because you don't want to break through the seam allowance at all. And once you're happy that it's all turned right sides out and the seam is laying right on the edge, give it a good press. Then top stitch all the way around the edge. This just helps it to lay flat and decorates it too. So that's one of Norman's arms finished. Make the left arm in exactly the same way. You can see it's the reverse of the right arm. Now take the pocket front. From the bottom corner, measure 3 1/4 inches up the right hand side and mark this with a pin. Take the right arm and place it right sides facing on top, marking the edge of the arm with the pin. The raw edges should match up. Pin it into place. The thumb needs to be facing upwards like this, and you'll notice that the arm actually faces upwards as well. Now tack that into place. Now on the other side, measure the same distance. So from the bottom corner, measure 3 1/4 inches up from the bottom corner and mark it with a pin. Now take the left arm and place this right sides facing on top. Again, make sure the thumb is facing upwards and the raw edges match. Because the raw edges are cut at a slight slant, this will make the arms face upwards, which means they'll be facing the right direction when you finish the bag. Again, pin this into place. Now tack the arms into place at the edge and a little bit of the way in too. This will just help to keep the arms flat and facing in the right way during assembly. Making Eddie the Elf. Place the right ear front and the right ear back right sides facing. Remove the labels before you do this. Match up all the raw edges so that the top straight edge and the rounded bottom edge of the ear and the pointed elf top edge all match up and pin together. Now sew together all the way around the edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but don't stitch across that top straight edge. Once that's done, trim the seam allowances. It will just help to reduce bulk inside the ear because it's quite a little piece. Trim that all the way around the edge. And then trim out a little V of fabric from those corner pieces. It will just help the ear to lay flat when it's turned right sides out. Now turn the ear right sides out. If you have a turning tube, it makes it a little bit easier because you can just pop the tube inside, push the stick through. But if you haven't got a turning tube, don't worry, just turn it out right sides out carefully. Now use the stick to make sure all the seams are lying right on the edge. If you use the pointed part of the stick, just run it along the seam and that will help to make sure the seam is right on the edge. It's worth spending a little bit of time with these small fiddly pieces because it just makes them neater when you've finished. Once it's all turned right sides out and the seams are lying right on the edge, give it a press and then top stitch all the way around the edge. So that's the right ear. Make the left ear in exactly the same way. Now take the elf pocket front and take a tape measure and measure and mark 5 inches up from the bottom corner along the right hand side. You can see here the 5 inches just comes below the hair. Now take the right ear and place it right sides facing on top so that the top edge of the ear matches up with the pin. The pointy part of the ear needs to be facing upwards and the raw straight edge of the ear needs to match up with the pocket front. Put a couple of pins in to hold it in place. Now, from the bottom corner, measure and mark the same measurement 5 inches up the left-hand side. And mark this with a pin. Take the left ear and place that right sides facing on top, making sure the pointy part of the ear faces upwards and the top of the ear matches with that pin, and then pin it into place a couple of times. Now tack that into place close to the edge and also a little bit further in too. And then your pocket front is ready and the ears are attached. Making Robbie the Robin. Take the right wing front and the right wing back. Remove the labels and then place them right sides facing, matching up all the raw edges. You can see the wider part of the wing is at the top and the narrower part of the wing is at the bottom. Pin it together all the way round in just a few places, but just make sure the raw edges match. They are exactly the same size, so they will match up, so just ease them round to make sure that it's nice and even. Now sew together all the way around the edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but don't stitch across the straight edge. Once that's done, trim the seam allowance just because this will remove bulk and it's quite a little piece and it will help it to lay flatter. When you get to the little point that's between the top of the wing and the bottom, trim that inwards a little bit as well. If you just make a little snip down there and remove a little bit of the fabric bulk, it will help the wing to lay flatter. Now turn the wing right sides out. This is really easy to do because it's got quite a big opening, so it's easy to push out. So just use your fingers to push it out because you've got the top and the bottom of the wing. Now I use a stick for my turning tool, but you can use any turning tool to do this as long as it's not too sharp. But run the edge of the pointed part of the turning tool along the seam and this will help to keep the seam laying right on the edge. Make sure that you push out all the little pieces, particularly the bit on the bottom part of the wing, so that the seam is lying right on the edge all the way round. Take a little bit of time to do this so that you get it nice and neat. Once that's done, give it a little press and then top stitch all the way around the edge. I also worked some stitches along some of the wings to just add a little bit of detail. Make the left wing in exactly the same way. Now take the pocket front and measure up from the bottom corner up the right hand side of the pocket front, measure 5 inches and mark this with a pin. Now take the right wing and place the top edge of it at that pin. The wider part of the wing needs to be facing upwards. So place it right sides facing, match the raw edges of the wing with the wider part at the top, just like this. Now measure 5 inches from the bottom corner up the left side of the pocket. Take the left wing and place it right sides facing on top, again making sure that the wider part is at the top. And pin it into place. Now tack the wing into place along the edge and a little further in too, just to hold it straight during assembly. Making Penny the Penguin. Take the right wing front and the right wing back, remove the labels and place them right sides facing. Match all the raw edges around. You've got the straight edges at the bottom and then the curved edge where the wing curves upwards. Match all the edges and place a few pins to hold it together all the way around. Now sew the wing together all the way around the edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but leave that straight edge unstitched. Once you've done that, trim the seam allowance down in half just to remove the bulk, because this will help it to lay flatter, and around the curved edge and then up the other little straight side. If you remove a little V of fabric where that straight edge goes upwards, it will just help to remove the bulk. Now turn the wing right sides out. You can do this by just turning it like I'm doing here. It will just push all the way out. Once you've got it turned, you can then use a turning tool to help it all come out nicely. I'm using the stick here that comes with my turning tool set just to push the wing out. Do it quite carefully because you haven't got a very big seam allowance here, so you don't want to break through the seams. But if you just do it nice and gently, push the fabric onto the turning tool rather than the turning tool into the fabric. Now run the edge of your turning tool along the edges of the seams, because this will help them to lie right on the edge, because you'll get a much better shape to your wing if the seams are lying right on the edge. So just run the tool along them. Once that's done, press the whole wing nice and flat and then top stitch all the way around the edge. This just neatens it and holds the two layers together. Once you've done that, make the left wing in exactly the same way. Now take the pocket front and measure along the right hand side 4 inches up from the bottom corner and place a pin in this position. Now take the right wing and place it right sides facing so that the top of the wing is at that 4-inch mark, and pin it into place. The top curved edge of the wing should be facing upwards, just like I've done here, so that the wings are facing the right way when it's done. Now along the left hand side of the pocket, measure 4 inches up from that bottom corner and mark that with a pin. Then take the left wing and place that right sides facing on top. Again, match up the raw edges of the wing with the raw edges of the pocket and make sure that top curved edge is on the top, just like I've done here, so you can see that the wings are actually overlapping because they're quite long, so they look like the penguin's wings, and pin it into place. You want them to stay nice and flat, so tack them into place down the edge and then a little bit further in the way in to hold them straight during assembly, and your pocket front is now finished. Attaching the pocket. It doesn't matter which one of the bags you're making, you attach the pockets in the same way. I'm going to show you using the Gnome bag, but it works the same way for all of the bags. So take the bag front and the pocket front that you've already made and place the pocket front in the bottom right corner of the bag front. Match the corner and all the raw side edges and pin together. You'll notice that when you're pinning your pocket front to your bag front, whichever bag you're making, that the prints will match up so that the print that's sitting beneath the pocket matches up. So like with the Gnome here, you can see the hat then pokes above the top of the pocket. So once you've pinned it together down the sides and then across the bottom, so down the sides, you've then got to pin the top of the pocket into place. So pin it about an inch below where you've attached the casing. This is just to hold it steady during the stitching, but you don't want to have to remove the pins when you're stitching. So if you put them about half an inch to an inch below that seam, then it helps to keep it in place. And I also put a pin in the top of the casing just to hold that flat as well. Now you need to sew right on top of the seam that joins the casing to the pocket. Can you see just here, right on top of the seam? So on the casing, but if you can stitch on top of the seam, it'll work better. Then tack the edges of the pocket in place down the sides. You can see here that where I've sewn the seam right on top of the casing and the pocket is tacked. Now take the bag back, place it right sides up. And then take the pocket back that you made earlier and put this in place, but in the left-hand corner this time, the bottom left-hand corner, so that it matches up later. And then pin this into place, just like you did with the pocket front. Put all the pins in to hold everything in place. And again, you will need to tack along the sides and also sew on top of that seam that joins the casing to the front. When that's done, you can see I've stitched just on top of that seam and I've tacked the pocket into place along the side edges. Assembling the bag. The bag is joined together at the sides and bottom with French seams, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. Now take the bag front and the bag back, and although this sounds odd, this is the way you have to do the French seam to get a neat finish, so it works. Place them wrong sides together. French seams are easy to do, but the great thing about them is you'll have no raw fraying edges on the inside or the outside of the bag, which is perfect when you're not lining a bag. So with wrong sides together, match up the raw edges of the bag front and the bag back and pin them together all the way around. When you get to the top of the pockets, just make sure that they match up exactly, because once these are sewn together, you want them to match on the right side. So just take time to make sure those top of the pockets on the bag front and the bag back are matching up exactly. Then pin the bag together. Make sure the bottom corner of the bag is matching, particularly where the pocket is, because you've got lots of layers there, and pin it together. Turn it round, and along the bottom edge, make sure that the edges of the pocket match up exactly, and pin together. And then pin the other corner together. If you make sure the corners match up, then the seams between them, the raw edges between them will match up too. And then pin it together up the other side. Now stitch together all the way around using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, down the side, across the bottom and up the other side. Remember, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once that's done, you can see that's all joined together with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, what you're going to have to do now is trim the seam allowance in half. So it'll be about 1/8 inch wide. You don't need to measure this, just trim the seam allowance in half. Do this carefully because you need to do it so that you've trimmed off that little strip all the way along. This just removes the part of the seam so that it doesn't come through in a moment. Trim it all the way around, down the sides and across the bottom. Once that's done, you've now got a tiny little seam allowance, which doesn't look like it's going to be very strong, but it's fine because we're going to put another seam in there in a moment. Now, although this seam allowance is quite small and it's quite fiddly to press open, in a moment you're going to have to turn the bag wrong sides out so that you can put that seam on the edge. So if you can take the time now to press this seam allowance open, it's much easier to get the seam laying right on the edge in the next stage. So do that all the way around, down the sides and across the bottom. Once that's finished, turn the bag wrong sides out. Push out the corners. You could use a turning stick for this or a turning tool, but just make sure the corners are nicely pushed out. Then making sure that the seam lays right on the edge. Now this is why I pressed the seam open a little bit in the last stage, because if you do that, it's much easier to get that seam laying right on the edge. And then give it a nice press. Roll it between your fingers, because the important thing here is that the seam is laying right on the edge, because those raw cut edges we're going to enclose with another seam in the moment. So if the seam's lying right on the edge, it means the raw cut edges will be lying right inside and won't show through. So just take a bit of time to roll the edges between your fingers and press them so that the seam is lying right on the edge. And when you get to the corners, make sure the corner is pushed right into the edge as well. So repeat this along the sides and along the bottom as well. This is where taking time to press, particularly a little steam press, really does make a difference to how neat your sewing will be. Now, pin to get the bag front and back together. We're going to be sewing along here, and to hold it all together flat, because you've only just pressed it, it will hold it together. Place some pins about 1/2 to 1 inch in, because you don't want to have to remove them while you're sewing, but by pinning, it just keeps everything nice and flat while you're still on your ironing board. Now sew together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance again, all the way along the side, across the bottom and up the other side, so that the seam is a 1/4 inch in from that seamed edge. Once that's done, you can now see this is the inside of the bag. That's really neat. No raw edges showing, nice and neat. And with a double seam, it's extra strong too. If I turn it right sides out, you can see that on the right side, you've got a nice seamed edge. Looks just like a normal seam. No raw edges, no fraying. And with a bag like this, because you're going to use it for shopping and put lots inside, the stronger the seam, the better. So that's the French seam finished for the bag outer and front and back. Making the handles. Use a 1/4 inch seam allowance for making the handles. Fold one handle in half lengthways with right sides together, making sure that the long raw edges are matching up and pinned together along the length. You can press it, give it a little press if you want to at this stage, just to hold it flat, or just pin it together. Now sew together all the way down the length. I also tacked it together across the short end. Now press it so that the seam lays running down the centre. Press that seam open. Now turn it right sides out. I'm using a turning tube, which is why I've tacked it across the edge. If you haven't got a turning tube, then just turn it right sides out. But if you have, put the tube all the way to the end, which is why I've tacked the end, using the straight edge of the stick, push the handle all the way through the tube to turn it right sides out. And then using a seam unripper or a small pair of scissors, just undo those tacking stitches across the short end. Now once that's done, press it again, making sure that the seam is laying down the centre of the back edge. This just means that the print will be central across the top, and also when you've got a handle it gives it a flatter finish if you've got the seam running down the centre of the back. So give it a good press and then top stitch along the top edge and along the bottom edge using a straight stitch or a decorative stitch if you prefer. Then give it a good press so it's nice and flat. That's one handle complete. Make the other handle in exactly the same way. Attaching the handles. Take the bag that you've just sewn together and keeping it wrong sides out. You need to turn the top edge over by 1/2 inch. So if you measure and mark with a pin 1 inch down from the top edge, pop a pin in, and then if you fold that raw edge over to meet up with the pin, you've then turned it over by 1/2 inch and give that a little press. Then carry on and turn the whole of the top edge over by 1/2 inch to the wrong side of the bag, just like I've done here. Now we're going to create a double hem to make the top of the bag nice and neat and strong. So now you need to turn it over by 1 inch. So again, if you measure 2 inches in from the folded edge, from the top folded edge, 2 inches, and mark that with a pin. That's why I like to do this on my ironing board, because then I can push the pins in and they stay in place. It makes much quicker because you can take the pins out as you go. Now fold that top folded edge over so it meets up with the pin. And place the pin in place. Then give that a press, and that's turned it over by 1 inch. And repeat that all the way around the top of the bag. Now you've got a nice double hem at the top of the bag. So we're going to put the handles in now. So refold the bag so that the seam is in the centre, so that you can do all the pinning and measuring. It's easier. So measure 3 inches to the right of the seam. So the actual seam, not the sort of the folded over bit, but the actual seamed bit. 3 inches to the right and place a pin. Now take one of the handles and with it right sides up, slip the end of it under that double hem. The top end of the handle needs to come right up to the top of the hem, and the outer edge of it needs to come where that 3 inch pin was. Now pin that handle into place at the top and the bottom. By pushing the handle right up to the inside, it's making the handle extra strong, what you need with the shopping bag. Now turn the bag round so that the other seam on the opposite side is in the centre this time. And take your tape measure and measure and mark 3 inches to the left of the seam. And mark that with a pin. Now take the handle and run it through your fingers to make sure it stays straight and you haven't twisted it. And again, placing it right sides up, push the end of the handle right onto the double hem up to the top fold so that the outer edge of it is at that 3 inch pin mark. Fold the double hem back over and pin the handle into place. I know the handle's facing downwards at this point, but it will all make sense in a moment. Now to put the other handle in place, from that seam, measure 3 inches to the right of it. Take the other handle, and again, right sides up. Slip the end of the handle under the double hem so the outer edge of it matches with that 3 inch pin mark, and the top of the handle is right up to that fold. And pin the end of the handle into place. Now move the bag round so you're back to the first seam that you did. You can see the other handle's pinned in place there. And measure and mark 3 inches to the left of the seam. And just like you did with the first handle, run the handle through your fingers to make sure it's flat, not twisted at all. Slip the end of the handle underneath the double hem so that the top of it is right up by that fold and the outer edge is by that 3 inch mark, and pin the handle into place. So now both of your handles are pinned securely in place right up inside the double hem at the top of the bag. Now go around and pin the rest of the folded over hem into place between all the handles, just to hold it nice and flat while you sew it. Now top stitch into place all the way around the edge, round the bottom edge of the turned over hem, just above where the handles come out. So you can see that I've stitched around the bottom edge all the way round. But obviously the handles are facing the wrong way. So all you have to do is fold the handles so they're facing upwards and pin into place. Now, by attaching handles in this way, it means that firstly there are no raw edges showing, but also by sewing them at the bottom, then folding them up, and in a moment we're going to sew across the top. Those handles are sewn into place twice at the bottom and the top. It makes them extra strong, and it also gives a nice neat edge to a bag. This is a really good technique for using if you're making a non-lined bag, which you need for the Shopaway bag because you don't want too much bulk or it won't fold into the little pocket. So fold all those handles upwards, just like I'm doing here, and pin them into place. Now we're going to top stitch around the top of the bag, and I find it a little easier and neater to do this from the right side. So turn the bag right sides out. Obviously your pins are now on the inside, so all you need to do is place a pin on the outside. I usually place one vertically at this point and then remove the pin from the inside, otherwise you'll forget and stitch over them. So working all the way round, put a pin on the outside and then remove the pin from the inside. You can put a couple of pins in here if you prefer, just to hold it all flat, because you want those handles to be facing upwards, but nice and vertically, not twisted at all. So take care to put the pins in. And then top stitch all the way around the top edge. That will add a neat finish, but it will also secure the handles so they're facing upwards. So now you've got a really nice, neat top edge with a nice deep hem, so it looks lovely. You've got French seams on the inside, so it's nice and neat. And there's the pocket all attached. Now I've turned it right sides out with little hands or ears or wings if you're making the other bags. And then the back of the bag with a little pocket. So it just looks like a little gnome in the corner. Finishing off. Now that your bag's turned right sides out, thread the cord into a safety pin. Put a safety pin on the end of the cord just so that you can thread it through the casing. So just pierce the cord with your safety pin. You can use a narrow polyester cord for this, some twine, narrow ribbon, just something that's narrow that will go through but that's reasonably strong. So starting from the side seam edge of the pocket casing, thread the cord all the way through using your safety pin. It's quite a narrow casing, which is why you need a narrow cord, but you don't want it too thick because it needs to gather up nice and neatly. So that's why it's got quite a narrow casing. Because I've tried to make the pocket as small as possible so that it'll fit the bag inside but not to be too bulky. Thread it all the way through and then pull the safety pin and the cord out through the other end of the casing. This is the front casing. Now thread the safety pin back through and the cord through the side of the back casing. So now we're on the side edge of the bag and we're going through the back casing. So the cord has to go all the way through the front casing and then through the back casing. So if you just push the safety pin through a little bit and then ease the gathers until it comes all the way through, and now you're back where you started. So the cord now goes all the way through the front and the back. There'll be a little loop of cord at the other seam. So hold the two ends of the cord together and push them through a spring toggle. These little spring toggles are ideal for this because they will hold the cord tight when you gather it up. You can get them in different colours. I've used a metal one here. You can get plastic ones and different colours. So just choose one that you like. Now pull the ends of the cord so that they're level. And then make sure that the cord goes nice and evenly and that the whole of the pocket is flat. Once you're happy that the pocket's flat, tie the ends of the cord in a knot just beyond the toggle. You might have to push the toggle in a bit so you've got enough room to tie the ends. So tie them nice and tightly. Just double check before you really tighten them that the pocket's laying flat, and then tighten up the knot by pulling the ends open from one side and from the other, and then just trim off the ends to neaten them. And now your bag is finished. So all you have to do to fold it up, open up the pocket, push all of the bag and the handles inside, no special folding, just push it inside until it's all neatly inside the pocket, and then take the toggle, pull up the cord, And then to hold the gathers in place, just pull your toggle back down. And there's your little pocket that you can keep in your handbag or with you anytime so that you've always got it to hand. And it looks really sweet, looks like a little character with his arms or ears or wings, depending on which one you've made. And there it is, you've made your Shopaway bag.